In Australia is officially the worst on record, with the average property costing 8 times the median household income.
For a growing number of Aussies, the cost of owning or even renting a home is totally out of reach.
Australia is in the grips of a well-documented housing crisis as home prices continue to climb, with demand still outstripping supply.
Unlike you, these false promises and offering the world, but you can't back it up. That's the problem with this Labor government.
White sandy beaches, high salaries, and the promise of a better life. That's what Australia used to be. But in 2025, something's terribly wrong in the country. More than 221,000 people packed their bags and left last year, an 8% jump from the year before. And the most shocking part? Many are Australians themselves. Young professionals, growing families, even retirees, all fleeing the place they once called home. This isn't just a housing crisis or a cost of living squeeze. This is the death of the Australian dream, and it's happening right before our eyes. 1 in 25 homes uninsurable by 2030, 3.3 million people living in poverty, 700,000 children going hungry, housing prices 11 times the average income. These aren't statistics from a developing nation. This is Australia, the country that promised the good life, beautiful beaches, high salaries, the Australian dream. But something's gone terribly wrong, and people aren't just struggling, they're leaving in record numbers. This is why living in Australia has become a nightmare. Let's start with the biggest crisis: housing.
Our rent went up yesterday by 35%.
And trust me, it's worse than you think. Remember when owning a home was part of the Australian dream? Well, that dream has turned into a nightmare. In the 1970s, you could buy your first home at 25. Today, the average first-time buyer is 36. The numbers are staggering. The median house price? $800,000 nationwide. Want to live in Sydney? Better have $1.1 million ready. The average Australian makes around $72,384 a year. Do the math. That's 11 times their salary just to buy an average home. Remember when a house cost 3 times your annual income? Those days are long gone. Today, the average property costs triple what it was 25 years ago. In Sydney, it's even worse. It's now the second least affordable city on Earth. Only Hong Kong beats it. Let that sink in. But here's where it gets really interesting. The government knew this was coming. Way back in 2003, they were warned. The Productivity Commission saw the signs. House prices were skyrocketing from 6 times the average income to 9 times. They suggested reviewing things like capital gains tax and negative gearing. But guess what happened? Nothing. 2 decades of inaction. 2 decades of watching the crisis grow. But here's what makes it truly terrifying. Australia is projected to fall short of its housing targets by 300,000 homes by mid-2029. In the September 2024 quarter alone, only 44,884 homes were completed. That's 15,000 short of the quarterly goal. And the government's response? They're focusing on how many people are coming in, not on the Australians being forced out of their own country. And it's not just about buying. The rental market? It's a war zone. 1 million low-income households in housing stress. That means spending more than 30% of their income just to keep a roof over their heads. And for those in the private rental market, 58% are struggling to make ends meet. But it gets worse. On any given night, more than 122,000 Australians are homeless. Not because they're unemployed, not because they're not trying, but because the system is broken. Rental prices are soaring. Vacancies are at record lows. People are queuing for hours just to look at apartments covered in mold. And these aren't just numbers. These are real people, real families, real lives being torn apart. The worst part? Australia is falling behind, way behind. But if you think housing is bad, wait until you hear about everything else. Over 3.3 million Australians are living in poverty, including 700,000 children, in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Food insecurity? 3.7 million households in 2023. That's families skipping meals to pay rent. Parents going hungry so their kids can eat. Your weekly grocery run that used to cost $20 to $30, now it's hitting $100 or more. And it's getting worse. Living cost indexes rose between 0.3% and 0.6% in just just 1/4. Over 12 months, a jump of 2.8 to 4.7%. These aren't just statistics. This is real people's lives being torn apart. But here's something that affects everyone: the daily grind. And it's grinding people down. 83% of all new migrants settle in capital cities. 77% crowd into just 4 cities: Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, and Perth. 57% squeeze into Sydney or Melbourne alone. The result? Gridlocked roads, overcrowded trains, 3-hour daily commutes. That's 15 hours a week, 60 hours a month, just sitting in traffic, trying to get to jobs they need to pay for homes they can barely afford. And public transport? If you live outside the metro area, good luck. You're forced to drive, spend more on fuel, more on maintenance, more time away from the family. It's a vicious cycle that never ends. And just when you think it couldn't get worse, there's another threat looming. Climate change isn't just making Australia hot, it's making it unlivable and uninsurable. In the past 3 years alone, record-breaking bushfires and floods have killed more than 500 people and billions of animals. But here's the terrifying part. By 2030, that's just 6 years away, 1 in 25 homes will be uninsurable, another 1 in 11 underinsured. Do the math. That's hundreds of thousands of families at risk. Queensland tells the scariest story. 40% of all uninsurable homes, they're right there. When floods hit Brisbane, it wasn't just bad, it was biblical. Ask Sam Bosted. He's not just any homeowner. He's an architect who specializes in disaster-proof homes. Even he watched helplessly as floods swallowed his house. I was shocked at how fast it rose, he says. More than a meter in 2 hours. I went from being worried about our property to being worried about our safety. A boat was his only escape. Insurance companies, they're running scared. Premiums have quadrupled since 2004. In Northern Australia, they're 10 times higher than anywhere else. And that's if you can get insurance at all. Many companies are just saying no, refusing to cover high-risk areas, leaving families exposed, vulnerable, one disaster away from losing everything. The Exodus tells a powerful story. Young Australians are leading the charge. The median age of those leaving? 31. These aren't retirees looking for a sea change. These are Australia's future leaders, its innovators, its builders, all giving up on the lucky country. Take Lloyd and Mandy's story. They ran a business and worked side jobs in Byron Bay, did everything right, worked hard, saved money, but when they sat down with a mortgage broker, reality hit hard. Face a life of crippling debt or leave Australia.
So about 3 years ago now, my wife Mandy and I left Australia on a one-way ticket to Southeast Asia.
They chose Thailand. Now they have a 3-bedroom villa with a pool for less than they paid for a studio in Byron Bay. Or consider Sonia Chuvoska's story. After 10 years in Australia, she and her husband are heading back to Bulgaria. Why? Because they can buy a house there for $50,000. No mortgage needed. That's quite a good incentive, she says, instead of being stuck here paying a mortgage all your life. But this might be the most heartbreaking part of all. An entire generation of Australians, educated, hardworking, ambitious, all watching their dreams slip away. Meet Chelsea Hickman, 28 years old, fashion designer, worked full-time for almost a decade, did everything right, everything society told her to do. The result? She can't even rent an apartment by herself. Financially, how could I ever afford both a home and children, she asks. The numbers just do not add up. Or take Tarek Biangansky, 26 years old, IT manager, good job, good salary. He laughs when asked about buying a home. It's just so obviously out of reach that it's not even really a thought anymore, he says. And this is coming from someone that really has got it pretty good. And here's the cruel irony. Many young Australians now have this dark joke. They call it the death lottery, waiting for their parents to die so they might inherit a house. Friends who have parents who are in property have this kind of morbid knowledge, says Hayley Van Ree. When their parents die, they might be okay. I hate that it's my reality, but it's not just about housing. It's about a complete breakdown of the Australian promise. The idea that hard work equals success? Gone. The promise of a fair go? Dead. As one expert puts it, education and hard work are no longer the main determinants of how wealthy you are. Now it comes down to where you live and what sort of house you inherit from your parents. This isn't just about economics, it's about the death of hope. The end of aspiration, an entire generation forced to choose, stay and struggle, or leave and start over. And more, they're choosing to leave, heading to Japan, Singapore, Europe. Anywhere that offers a glimpse of the dream they once had at home. This isn't just about statistics or economics. It's about what happens when a country loses its way, when the lucky country runs out of luck, when hard work no longer guarantees a decent life. Australia is changing, and not for the better. An expert had this to say: Australia is less of an egalitarian meritocracy. The system is rigged, the game is fixed, and ordinary Australians are paying the price. So what's next for Australia? The government promises reforms, more social housing, tighter immigration controls. But is it too little, too late? The numbers don't lie. The exodus continues. The dream is dying, and millions of Australians are asking themselves, is it time to leave this country behind? But here's something interesting. Australia isn't alone in this crisis. Across the world, another nation is facing its own nightmare: France. The country of culture, cuisine, and good life. Or at least, that's what it used to be. The French dream is also turning dark. And just like Australia, people are fleeing in record numbers. Stay tuned for our next video where we'll dive into more details on this matter. And remember to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced similar issues in your country? Let us know. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.